So there you go. My name is Atiya. I am a grateful member of Overeaters Anonymous. What I really want to talk about the just for today. I'll come back to that. So I've been in OA for over 18 years now. I came in November of 2006. And I came in not because I wanted to lose weight. I know that's a reason why a lot of people come into the rooms. I came in because I knew that I was sick because I was binging and I wanted some kind of help. What preceded me coming into the room was on Thanksgiving Day in 2006, my sister and I got into a shouting match. And that was really unusual for our family. We all tended to be relatively quiet. There was not a lot of conflict in my house growing up. And what started this shouting match was I was telling my sister that I didn't like the way that she and her husband were raising their children. Now, I know today that that was none of my business, but at the time, I didn't have that boundary. I didn't know that that was, their business. And when the shouting match was over and she and her family went home, I recognized the very first spiritual awakening that I had regarding recovery. I realized that I was still binging and I needed help. And when I say that I was still binging, I think my first binge was when I was 7 years old. It was around a holiday where you put together baskets and my mom was going out. And so she gave us all of the things that you put into a basket. And I remember putting all of the things in my mouth. And as far as I could tell, that was sort of like the very first time that I binged and actually had an outward manifestation of my illness as a compulsive eater. Once I got into recovery, though, and let me back up and say with you about my sister for Thanksgiving. I can tell you that today. I couldn't tell you that when I first came in. It took about, I would say, 8 or 9 months of me abstinently working the steps before those memories of how I came into the rooms actually came back to me. So it took that long for the food fog to lift as I was working the steps. Now, in recovery, I have recovered other memories, and some of the memories are very traumatic, and I won't go into a lot of detail here. But based on the recollections that I've had, based on conversations with my mother before she died, it seems like the first time that there was and that there was something wrong and I used food was when I was 2 or 3 years old. And many people, I'm sure, have heard that the age that you are emotionally is based on the age that you started using. And for me, I would say it was around 2 or 3. And my mom told me that when I was little, she would pop chewing gum in my mouth in order to calm me down. So I mark from that period of time when I first started using a substance. And it makes sense because I would say that was about the emotional age that I was when I came into the rooms. I'll come back to that in a minute because I want to further that point, but I'll just share a little bit more. So I've talked about being 2 or 3. I've talked about 7. The first time that I remember throwing up was probably when I was 9 years old. I went to a party. I think I was also partly sick, but I know that I binged at that party and just remember throwing up a lot of the food that I had binged on. And when I was 14, my father died. This was the summer before I went to high school. After the summer was over, the first day of classes, I had gained 70 pounds. And that was not my top weight, but that was that was descriptive of the kind of binge eater. I was a bulk binge eater. I could gain 10 pounds in a week. I did that. I think there was a time when I had a 30-pound swing within a week. So I could gain a lot of weight in a short period of time. When I was 17, someone introduced me to the concept of bulimia, and she was like, well, you can eat what you want, just get rid of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? If I was healthy, it might have occurred to me that the fact that I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? Like that was the great answer. That would have been a sign that how sick I was, but I wasn't healthy. I was very sick. And so it didn't even occur to me that there was something wrong with sticking my finger down my throat and throwing up after I finished eating. And the bulimia was something that I practiced for about 10 years. And then I went into therapy. Bulimia was arrested, and I have not returned to bulimia. But I got to a point where I just sort of accepted the fact that I was going to be fat because I could not stop eating compulsively. And I will now go back to, and that was sort of when I said before that I was still binging. The bulimia had been arrested, but I was still binging and I could not stop myself. And the language in the big book is really clear around that. It's like I cannot stop myself from starting in the first place. And then once I start, I cannot stop. And that was why I came into OA, because I wanted to be able to stop eating compulsively. And I could not do that on my own. And on that Thanksgiving day, when I was looking around, I was looking for something that would help. And I didn't know about OA. I didn't know about 12 steps. But when I was doing my online search, it was like you all found me. Like I'm looking, and then suddenly there was like the OA page was there. And I started reading, and for the first time in my life felt like this is me. Like you all were describing what I was experiencing, what I had experienced, what I would not share out loud with people, that things that I only did in the dark, that I hid. And yet here was a whole fellowship of people who were just like me. And I went to my first meeting the following Tuesday, and I went to my second meeting the following Tuesday after that. And then 3 days later, the next day, Tuesday and then Wednesday, I was at my third meeting, and it was at that time that I surrendered my food to what I then would have called God, and I have been gratefully abstinent since that time. Now, I want to share something, because if you just hear what I just said, you might think that the phrase struck abstinent. For many years, I was upset because I didn't think I was struck abstinent because it took me 10 days. I didn't realize that it takes some people a long time. what happened, though, from the time that I went to my first meeting until I surrendered my food was I binged, because that's what I did when I was afraid. And at my very first meeting, I heard someone sharing their story, and I remember going to a newcomers meeting, and there were people at that meeting who were abstinent and recovering through working the 12 steps. And I am in the same location, the general location that I was when I came into the rooms. And it's something that we talk about. We have very strong recovery in this area. The people who were here when I came in 18 and a half years ago are still here. They continue to work the steps. There are a lot of people in this area who have long-term abstinence and recovery through working the steps. And we realize how fortunate we are, because not everyone has this experience. I've been able, through OA service, to travel to meetings throughout. I've been to meetings internationally for OA service. And I know that what I have here is special. And I offer that to say that the 12 steps work. Working the steps has worked for me. It's worked for my sponsor, who's, I think, 30-something years in. It's worked for people, my first OA sponsor. I mean, there are tons of people who have experienced strength and hope that working the steps does work. And I'm grateful for that. I want to go back to the just for today, because I think it's really helpful to hear like what a day looks like in recovery. And today, if I had to pick a day, I wouldn't pick today to tell you all about, which is why I'm going to tell you. So I got up this morning, or excuse me, I didn't even get up, because that implies I actually got out of bed. I woke up this morning after my meditation. I put my laptop on my bed, and I started working on my taxes. And it's not really, I'm not doing my taxes myself. It's an understanding with my tax preparer. And I started doing that work, and I felt like I had gotten a good chunk of it done. Came down for breakfast and then had to rush to a work meeting. I work remotely now. Left my plate on the table, which I never do, but my partner's out of town. And so this would have been like the perfect opportunity for me to play hooky. Instead, I was working all day. I worked from the time of my first meeting until my stomach was like, it's time to leave and go to lunch. And so I came back down, made my lunch, and then went back up. While you all were reading, I heard today what I needed to hear, which is to do two things that we don't want to do. And I had forgotten that that is from just for today, but that is many days for me, doing something that I don't want to do. And for me, it usually is doing my calisthenics. And about a year and a half ago, I realized that I had a weight gain. And I was surprised, because I had eaten the same thing as I had for years, and suddenly there was more weight on my body. And so my thought was, well, I'm going to eat less. And I talked to my doctor, and she said, no, I don't want you to eat less. And I said, but I can do it. I know exactly what I eat. That would be very easy for me. She goes, no, I don't want you to change how much you eat. I want you to start doing some weight training, do some squats, do some whatever. And I say whatever because I probably tuned her out, because I was like, no, I don't want to do this. Well, then you all read this just for today. And that's what we learn how to do in these rooms. I learned how to do things that I don't want to do. And I learned how to not do things that I want to do and do things that I don't want to do. And what is that called? It's called surrender. And that is probably if I could pick any spiritual principle that has shaped my recovery over the past 18 and a half years, it's surrender. And doing things that I don't want to do has just become, what do I call it? It's Friday. It's Friday. So I'm on meetings all day and I'm typing emails and I'm sitting in the chair when I want to be outside. When I finish talking, it's practically dark outside. The sun is gone. It was a gorgeous day and I was inside all day. But you all made me into a good employee. When I first came into the rooms, I'd only been at my job for about a year. I owed amends to everyone at my job. I was horrible. I was mean to people, and I didn't know how to do anything differently. You all taught me how to live my life differently. It's why on a Friday when I would love to be outside, the sun is still out. I'm an hour ahead of you all. The sun is still out. I'd love to be outside now, but I'm on this meeting. Why? Because if I don't do what you all have taught me how to do to take care of myself, I'm not going to have a life. I'm not going to have an employer. I know because I know what I was like beforehand, and what my life was like before recovery. So, showing up and doing things that I don't want to do, that's what I've learned how to do in these rooms, and it works. So I appreciated hearing about the World Service Convention, because that is something that I also attended. And one of my takeaways, and I guess it's two things. I'll pitch a little bit on the tool of the telephone. So my current sponsor lives in a different state. She's actually in your time zone. And she and I have been working together for about 18 and a half years. I call my sponsor daily. I don't always talk to her, but I pick up the phone and I call her daily. I haven't called her yet today, so I still have to do that. And one of the other things that I haven't done today that I need to do is my readings. And so when I went to the convention in Florida, part of the reason why I went is because I've been to every convention since I came in. So the first convention that I went to was in 2007. I was about a year into recovery, and that was actually where I met my current sponsor. And so I didn't want to pass up on the opportunity to attend the convention. Well, it wasn't until I got to the convention. The prior convention, for those of you who don't know, was 9 years ago. And because of the pandemic, they skipped the one that was to be. And so I went, and while I was there, I realized, the convention is in Orlando, which is part of my region. I'm in Region 8. And I only really put that together because I saw people who I remembered. Now, I'm someone who barely knows what I wore yesterday. I don't remember anything. And yet I'm seeing people whose faces I remember, whose names for a lot of them I remember. And it occurred to me that this is the fellowship. This is the fellowship in action. These are people who I did service with in Region 8 for years. There were people who I met at the World Service Business Conference for many years when I did that. And this is these are my people. You guys are my people. So that was something that was really important for me. And I was so glad that I went, because I could have stayed home and gotten the speakers and listened to the speakers, but I would have missed out on the fellowship. And I came out of the pandemic loving virtual meetings, in part because I could go to meetings in like different parts of the world, but more so because it's convenient. And who doesn't love convenience? I mean, hello, I don't like, I love convenience. And I love the fact that all of you are sitting there in person, and I'm sitting at home, and I'm like, oh, I get to call into a meeting. So it was really an important reminder for me of the importance of in-person fellowship. The other piece of this meeting was about the tool of the telephone. And I'm fortunate. My first OA sponsor really convinced me of the importance of using the telephone. She's like, you want to, set up like a calling network and get comfortable calling people. And so I did. And there are people who I still talk to who I met like in my early days. And yet during the pandemic, the people who I called, that like circle got really small. It was almost as if there was no one outside of like the 5 to 10 people who I would talk to on a regular basis. And one of the things that going to the convention did was it helped to remind me. I mean, I have like, I don't know, like easily 500 to 800 names and numbers in my phone of people in the rooms. So I have a lot of people who I just sort of forgot about. And so one of the practices that I did, again, making myself or doing something that I don't necessarily want to do, was I called people, and I first started with the people who I met at the convention. So I called people who I met at the convention who I had not known before, and then I called people who I saw at the convention who I hadn't talked to in a while. And that has also helped to open up my world a little bit. I don't know exactly what time I started speaking, but I'm going to wrap up by focusing on that this is a spiritual program of recovery. So I mentioned that I surrendered my food to what I used to call God, and I came in having had a really strong belief in what I would have called God back then. Believed. Like I came into this world believing in God, no doubt about it. However, I got to a point when I was early working the steps that I realized that even though I believed that God was love, there was a lot of fear that I had in the relationship. So I believed in God, but I was never obedient. I always did what I wanted to do. Even though I believed that God was everywhere present, I acted like God couldn't see me. So I would binge. I was sexually promiscuous. I would steal. I cheated. I lied. So I was doing all these things at the same time that I'm believing in God. So I recognized through working the steps that I had all this fear. And over time, I developed a loving relationship with higher power, and that relationship was what helped me to develop trust. So it was easier. As I mentioned before, I had surrendered pretty early, but there was still a lot of fear and doubt and insecurity. And over time, I developed a trusting relationship with God. I developed trust in myself. It is easier for me when I'm trusting myself than when I'm not, but you do what you have to do. And I got to a point where I stopped believing in God. And that was not something that I planned. And it wasn't something that I was even thinking was possible, but it's something that happened. And I want to share that because I know that different people have different spiritual paths. Different people have different beliefs. Coming at the big book from my vantage point, there's a lot of like, just keep coming back and you'll believe, keep coming back and you'll be a Christian, or keep coming back and, it'll all make sense. And I want to remind people that you can recover working the steps even if you don't have those beliefs. I use the tool of meditation. I use the spiritual principles. I use the steps and the tools of OA, and I continue to recover and I continue to get better. There are things about my life that I don't like, and yet because of all of you, I'm able to show up for them. I'm able to show up for my life today. So, with that, I pass.